Although there isn't many opportunities currently going on when it comes to investing in Pokemon sealed product, we're going to be deep diving and seeing if there are some interesting opportunities when taking a look at the general singles market for Pokemon. But before we jump into that, as always, we do weekly giveaways. All you have to do to enter is leave a like, comment down below, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Monday is the day in which we announce the weekly giveaway winners. So shout out to those three people. I will be showing them right now on the screen. Starman, sorry, pronounced that wrong. Tom Waziuta, and then Big Papa Necro. So shout out to you three. As per usual, you want to get your weekly rewards, all you have to do is message me directly on the Discord. Speaking of which, if you want to join the amazing Discord community that we have full of a ton of fans who are also interested in Pokemon, links are down in the description below for that, as well as all of our other socials. But jumping into today's topic. So this was one I briefly discussed about on Friday. However, I completely messed up and my face was recording directly over the card. So most of the time people had absolutely no idea which card I was directly discussing about. So I'm just going to try and redo the video and once again briefly apologize for that on Friday, but making sure that people can see the card that I'm discussing about and kind of get the main points out of it and try and hopefully do so in a more professional fashion manner so that we can get the most extraction in terms of value from looking at the cards that we're going to be looking at today. But starting it off, I'm going to be showing you guys 5 cards, and all 5 cards are going to each have different terms of market implications, and they're going to more or less give us a sense of direction specifically with the sets themselves as well as the individual cards themselves, and give us an idea of, hey, do we think the specific set, when looking at the top card, is it going up? Is it going down? Is it a good investment? Is it not a good investment? And kind of giving some of my points that I've mentioned many times before on my live streams or some other previous videos that you guys can kind of take away when making your own general investing decisions, because obviously I'm not a financial advisor. This is not financial advice. But taking a look at it, first card, Giratina Vstar. This is a card from Crown Zenith, obviously. You guys know where my personal opinion lies when it comes to products with Crown Zenith, or singles in particular. I think this is one of the best sets that they've come out with, of all time, honestly. It's an incredible set. It knocks it out of the park when it comes to everything you're looking for in a set, and so why not take a look at the best, most expensive card in the set? Maybe not best, but the most expensive card in the set. But I'm a huge Giratina fan. I love the card. Just taking a look at the overall value of the single card itself. So initially off the rip, the card valuation at its highest was around $176. And since then, it has dropped down to around $150. As discussed before, this is a set that is going to be continuously coming out in waves. We should expect it to continuously do so until about May. We've got product coming out in March, April, and then lastly May. So the expectation is the supply for this product is going to continue. So as per most singles, you're just going to expect a general price continuation downwards. However, before I give you my final kind of prediction, let's just take a look and see overall how the performance has been. Obviously, this set came out in January, so in terms of overall, PSA prices, whether it be a 9 versus a 10, they're going to be overinflated because the supply is generally much, much lower. And for those of you guys that are newbies here, that's something if you don't already know this, prices for singles and PSA singles tend to be much, much higher on the general release, especially considering that the grades for the Giratina being in such lower pop are going to more than likely be rush PSA orders. So when looking at the highest point of sale for this card, it was $765, and then it is now sitting at around $528. So when looking at my general concept of a spread for a card, being that you can pick this up at around that $150-ish price point and $528 is the 10 value, that is obviously an incredible price to be able to, if you get a 10, sell it for. However, with all of this being said, now that PSA has dropped prices, $15 is the current grading fee, it makes it kind of difficult to really make a general prediction on whether it's truly worth it, because we have absolutely no idea how far this PSA 10 value could really go down. Could it go down to $300? Could it go down to $350, $400? We can't really make that speculated prediction. All we know is that if you look at it right now, in terms of the general value, if you know your card is going to get a 10, if you are wanting to send it into grade, this is what you have to consider. $150 plus that $15 price point, $165 is kind of what you're looking at as your entry point. If hypothetically speaking, worst case scenario, let's say it drops, more than 50%, right? It's a 50% off card. It's now worth $250. You're still going to walk away with, in theory, if it gets a 10, roughly around, after fees and ship, an additional $75 value on top of your entry fee for the card itself, which, for some people that could be totally worth it. Maybe it's not, because there is such a more calculated risk with that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, from a just trying to shoot for a PSA 10 perspective, it is still within that range of margin where it's actually not the worst, idea to try and get a 10 off of it. However, here's where you start to have a little bit of a dilemma. What happens if you get a 9? Well, obviously, although the spread looks really enticing right now for the 9 card, because in theory, if you did get a 9, worst case scenario, you're going to break even or make a little bit of money, because the value of the 9 right now is $190 with $150. So you've got about a $40 spread after shipping and fees and everything. It's more than likely going to be closer to that break even point. But if the price of the 9 goes down, which is expected to, because there is going to be more supply of 9s as people send this card in for grading, then more than likely your value for getting this card in a 9 condition is going to drop. And so the risk itself is going to be drastically higher. Not to mention too, this might sound like a hot take, I don't really think it is. It wouldn't surprise me if this card went down to $100 in a raw, whether it be slightly above, slightly below, because as we saw with the most recent drop, the price of the card, if it were to just on average every, kind of new release go down anywhere between 10 to 20%, which it went down 20% based off the last release. If it were to continue that trend, it's going to go sub 100. But if it were to even go just half of that, general monthly downtrend percentage of 10%, then you're going to still look at the low 100s in terms of the value of this Giratina. So ultimately, you have to kind of say to yourself, okay, well, what does that put, if it were to drop down another $50, aka another 33%, could that in theory be a good value in terms of, getting the 9 because it's at 190? But if you're expecting the price to continuously drop and it's going to go to 100, where does that put the value of the 9? I don't think that the value of the 9 is just all of a sudden going to stay at the same price or go up. The expectation is if the raw is going down, so is the 9. So ultimately, when looking at this card, I think my general prediction is, it's going to just keep going down as long as we have more supply kind of coming out with it, as the set itself is still being pushed in waves. But these next two, I'm going to kind of clump together a little bit. This is going to be Giratina Vstar, Giratina V, not Vstar, from Lost Origin, and it is going to be the Lugia V from Silver Tempest, obviously being fully displayed on the screen. The reason why I am going to be combining these together is because they actually have extremely similar patterns when taking a look at the two. It's quite interesting to see how similar they are when really comparing the sets. Obviously, back-to-back sets, there's a lot of debate between which one is better. I think arguably for myself, if you take away the aspect of the pull rates, I think that Lost Origin is a better set. But historically, as we've said before, Silver Tempest has a Lugia. Lugia is one of the top performing cards. Expectation is the set overall from a sealed perspective is going to perform better. How does that kind of lead into the situation of, Giratina value versus the, Lugia value? Well, once again, calculating the pull rates into this, because the Giratina has been so much harder to pull, which is why you see such a massive price difference when comparing the value of the raw versus the 9 for each of the cards. Now, comparing the two, the reason why I say they're extremely similar to one another is this. Obviously, we're going to just make this assumption based off of, hey, no more reprints. Let's have a conversation about where the general risk-reward ratio of getting this card graded is, right? Taking a look at first the Giratina, we can see that the card in and of itself is right now sitting at around that $285-ish price point, roughly. To get a 9, you're going to make $325 just basically after shipping and fees. You're expecting that break even. That's good. This set has been out since September, so it's had enough time to kind of mature. As far as we know, there's no more booster boxes being printed. In theory, if that were to stay that way, you know, this isn't like a Crown Zenith set where we have that understanding and expectation of that product to come out. So in terms of the overall risk, hey, if I were to get a 9, worst case scenario, I break even, that's really good. Then taking a look at the general 10 value, right? You're saying to yourself, okay, difference is 285 versus 713 for the most recent sale. What is the general, you know, kind of belief that I have? I want the value from the 10 versus the raw spread to be at least a 1.5 times difference in general value. So, you know, speaking of, or sorry, 2.5 times general value when looking at the two. So just doing the general math, it's right around that price point that I like in terms of risk to reward ratio if you were to try and send this card in, hoping for a 10 versus a 9. So Giratina V specifically is a card that I really do like quite a bit from a just sending in perspective, because hypothetically speaking, let's say there is a reprint, right? Obviously your risk to reward ratio from the 9 is going to go down, but even if the card valuation were to go down drastically, let's say, you know, in theory, it were to go down another 50%, which sounds crazy, but we're talking like doomsday scenario, right? You're still going to be in the profit by at least $50. And those are the kind of risk to reward ratios we like to take, especially in periods that we're going through right now with no supply, you know, in the foreseeable future, as far as we know. Same concept kind of applies with this Lugia, right? Most recent sale for the raw is around 190. Obviously, this is all going off a TCG player. Looking at it from a 9 perspective, 225. That's roughly around the same exact kind of price point that we were discussing with the Giratina, and then comparing it with the raw versus the 9, it is once again in that really nice pocket, 2.5 times return value when looking at the general spread of 189 to 458. Absolutely love it. So I think that, personally speaking, I am actually a big fan of taking these cards if you are wanting to take that general risk, not financial advice, but there is actually some opportunity when looking at singles, which is weird to think about, right? Like, obviously I said early in the point of the video, and I said in my previous video, I don't think there's really any opportunities in the market in terms of sealed product. That still remains true other than the individual items that I mentioned. But when looking at the singles market, I'm like, is there opportunities where there isn't with you know, sealed product? And although I'm a huge fan of sealed product in the long term, obviously I do think that from a, you know, opportunity perspective, we're at a point now where we're like, all right, we can't really see much going on with sealed. What can we see in the, you know, short term where we can try and find and extract value elsewhere, right? And so being able to look at the singles value and being able to see, hey, there's some real opportunity when it comes to the grading market, specifically for some of the newer sets. It's really fascinating to see. It's really cool to see, because specifically for cards like these two, you would expect that they would actually have completely terrible spreads, knowing the fact of the matter that they're extremely popular cards. So seeing these opportunities arise, I'm a huge fan of it. My expectation for both of these cards is that if we don't see any more product, kind of everything is just going to continuously get flushed out. If you look at the general price chart from the raw perspective, the value for the Lugia has kind of flatlined, hasn't really done much, maybe gone up and down a little bit. Same thing kind of applies with the Giratina. The Giratina has been an extremely stable card in terms of its overall value, sitting at that 285. So what do I expect for the general raw value of the card? You know, I wouldn't be surprised if both of these cards were to easily get to that kind of, in the raw, you know, 225 for the Lugia and then 325 for the Giratina. Doesn't seem like a big jump, but that's more than a 10% increase, 15% increase. So I think, you know, taking that into consideration and then trying to say, hey, let me go send this card in for grading if, you know, there's still that risk to reward ratio there, and you know, the price of the product is just going to continuously go up. I see that as a very good risk to reward ratio when trying to find and extract profit in this current market in singles. Moving on to our fourth card that we're going to be taking a look at. We're going to be, with these next two, deep diving a little bit later. So, or maybe you want to say earlier, right? But looking at the kind of different eras of when the cards came out, we have obviously Crown Zenith, the most recent set, the last two sets, the Silver Tempest and the Lost Origin. Now we're going to be looking at Evolving Skies, Umbreon. All right, what's the kind of price point prediction with that? What are we kind of looking at the card in and of itself, right? And this one's going to have more price history because it has been out for much, much longer as a set and a card compared to the other three in which we showed. So what is that going to really show us? It's got a very interesting story that it's telling, right? At its lowest point, it was sitting roughly at around that $173 price point, end of 2021. That was when there was an absolute product dump, so it doesn't surprise me that it was at this price point. The general spread was much, much larger during this time too. As mentioned before in the previous video that got deleted, the reason for this was because PSA grading prices were much, much higher, right? So basically going into 2021, general grading prices were around that $50 price point. Early to springtime of 2022, prices for PSA was around that $30, and then they finally had this summer special where you could go send your cards in for grading to PSA, and you were going to be able to do so for $18. So although the price right now is at $15, so if we're hypothetically going off of the prices now, if you were to go send it in, which is what we're going to be going off of here, looking at the spreads between these cards, where we couldn't look at the other two, which were, $18 spread. In theory, you're looking at it and saying to yourself, hey, although the spread in theory, right, is much, much better historically, when going back and looking, that's because the value that you're, getting back then was a lot less because the grading price was so much higher. Hopefully that makes sense. So, 173 plus 50, once again, more than likely you're going to slightly lose money. Best case scenario, make profit, but like minimal profit, but really it's probably losing money just because after fees, since the card itself is so much more expensive when looking at it, comparing to the general spread. Obviously, as we've seen progressively, this card has continued its overall upwards trajectory, especially with the price of PSA graded card going down to 18. Looking at it over the summer, you started to see an overlap in the card's value, where the PSA 9 at some points in time was actually the same price, if not less, than the overall raw card. You saw this continuously happen up until it finally found a spread point for the overall value of the card for a brief moment in time, until it eventually ended up taking a huge old dump in terms of general value, being at the high point for the 9 of 631, now dumping to 530, so around a $100-ish drop. And then with the raw value 576 all the way down to 515, so about a 10% drop there, which is a significant drop when you consider the fact that this card has done nothing but just go up, right? So, expectation for this card to take a little bit of a dive was quite fascinating to see for sure. When looking at the value, comparing it to the raw to the 10, same thing with the 10, but even more drastic. 1300 was the overall high, and this wasn't just one fluke sale, right? You had multiple sales all the way leading to the top because we had such high volume of sales, and then $900 is where it is currently, but it kind of found a bottom at one point at around $800. Kind of crazy to see when you really think about the value dropping roughly $500. That's kind of insane for a card. Doesn't surprise me though, because when you really think about it, a lot of cards were being sent into PSA, and the population report for the card has drastically shot up as the price to go in and grade has just gone down so much. So it totally makes sense why to the run up of this, you did see that kind of general price increase. Not to mention too, this also lined up perfectly with that kind of small reprint of Evolving Skies back in August, which then ended up turning into really nothing. And then after that, you kind of just saw a price run of singles because everyone was like, all right, this is it. Evolving Skies got its quote unquote small reprint. we're done here. Let's just watch prices continue to climb. So, you know, ultimately at the end of the day, the correction itself was more or less just the game of it finally having opportunities to be graded at a cheaper price. And then in terms of the run up, once again, that just kind of lined up with the FOMO after Evolving Skies. The set itself did get that small reprint and it was finally over. So when looking at the card's value and you're saying to yourself, okay, well, it had a correction. Is this a stabilized correction? Is this going to continue to go down? Is this going to continue to go up? What's your kind of expectation when generally looking at this card and when looking at the general spread? Obviously, when comparing it to the raw to the 9 card, there's not real value when it comes to the spread. They're basically about, the same price, like maybe a $5-10 difference. So obviously you're gonna be losing value if you try and send this card in and you end up getting a 9. And when looking at the spread between the 10 and the raw, you're not even getting a 2x value if you were to send this card in. So hypothetically speaking, if more supply were to just come on the market and were to continue its most recent trend, the expectation is that you would be taking a massive risk trying to go buy this card. Of course, the Umbreon VMAX showing once again what we are discussing. Hopefully people can see this on the screen. Won't get upset with me. I apologize. You really got to be able to take everything with a grain of salt when looking at this overall and not expecting that the value of this card is just going to go sideways and potentially go up, but at a lot slower of a scale because the volume for this card just has kind of started to flatten out, I should say. And for me personally, when just looking at the general numbers for this specific card, it makes it hard for me not to say that it's just not really worth the investment when sending in. Price prediction, where do I think this card is going to be compared to the rest? Like I said before, I'm going to say it's going to more than likely just be kind of flatlined. I think that the expectation is the card's probably going to range. Look, this is what the value was, right? 177, found the high, 571, and it slowly went down to 464, and then it went and bounced back up to 521. Does that mean that, it bounced back up, it's just going to keep going up? Of course not. It's entirely possible that it could just kind of flatline at around that, $500-ish area. It's been increasing. It's been increasing ever so slowly, but I don't think it's going to just absolutely skyrocket at the rate it did before, because I think there was so much of an emotional drive behind that when it came to the lack of supply with sealed product no longer being available for Evolving Skies. So I think sideways and up is really the play. Would it surprise me if this card went all the way back up to its prior all-time high? Not at all. I think that you could see that potentially happen by end of this year, but end of this year, I don't think it's going to have just an absolute miraculous run-up where it's going to double in price in a 3-month period or a 6-month period, right? I think that it's going to kind of take its time, and it's going to more than likely, hit its all-time high or, break its all-time high, hit that $600 price point. But it's going to take some time to do so. Could it do it in 6 months? Yeah, wouldn't surprise me. But I think, I would err on it taking, a little bit longer of time. And since it is the, end of February going into March, saying end of year, that's going to be roughly around a 9-month period. So 6 to 9 month period, that's kind of the range I'm looking for when saying, will this card break the all-time high and potentially, hit that $600 price point for this single, which is crazy to think about, right? Last card we're going to be taking a look at. This is actually going to be an interesting one because I've had people ask me questions about this card in particular because we did see an absolute massive run up in the overall value. It is the Tyranitar from Battle Styles, right? Tyranitar V Sleepy Tea. So when looking at the card in and of itself, right, it had in the overall 9 condition, what has it done? It has done absolutely nothing but go down. Not surprisingly, because this was a set that came out during the time in which PSA had been closed down. So the value of this card continuously going down is quite obvious, because once you finally had some supply going to the market, it got a massive correction, right? Looking at the general single value of the card, if we're talking about from its overall low, however, in the raw price of $65 to now $114, it almost 2x in value. If you look at last year's price, and by last year I mean 2020 end of, to around the March of the start of last year. So it didn't really take that long for it to hit that price point, realistically speaking, around a 7-8 month period for it to have such a rapid increase, which for Evolving Skies, you're like, oh, that Evolving Skies will do that in a month or two, but for battle styles, it's kind of crazy to really consider. So when looking at this card overall, do I think that the volatility at this point, let's just break down the general TCG player value. Let's not look at the 9. Obviously, it found its kind of top and has since then dropped a little bit under 10%, like 8 or 9%. And it looks like since then, it's kind of flatlined for the past month or so. And with that, I think the volatility of this card is more than likely it's going to flatline. I think that this card in and of itself could potentially, continue to drop sub $100, but I think from a general value perspective, when I look at the card, I think that around the $100 price point is where it kind of belongs. Do I think that is going to continue to go up? Well, considering the 9 has done absolutely nothing but go down, let me ask you this. Do you think the raw value is going to continuously be more over the next several month period than the raw? I think that's unlikely. I think if we look at other charts such as the Moonbreon, when comparing the overall 9 value to the raw value, there was only certain glimpses in time where you saw that actually happen, where the value of the raw card was greater. And when I say glimpses, I mean it was like a 1-2 week span, right? Where you're like, oh wow, it just crossed over where the raw is more. And then it ended up making a correction on the 9 value until you saw once again an impasse of a crash between the two. So when taking a look at the 2 and looking at it from a charting perspective, with the raw getting extremely close to the 9, something's going to have to give. Either the 9 is going to shoot up in value, or the raw is going to have to make a correction. Obviously, you kind of decide that for yourself, but I'm going to err on the side of the raw, either flatlining or making a correction, because there's not really that much demand, I think, for a raw Tyranitar 9. Or sorry, just for a Tyranitar 9. But maybe, who knows? I could be 100% off. When looking at the spread between the 10 versus the raw as well, okay, it's about 2x, of a return, $100 versus $235. But it's not hitting that 2.5 times return that I like, right? We want it to be, if it's going to be at 103, we want it to be roughly around that 250-ish price point, right? And it falls short by at least $15. So risk to reward ratio on this card, if you are someone that wants to send this in for grading, I'm not a big fan of it. I think that, at this moment in time, this is a card that is more than likely going to go sideways and probably down a little bit. Like I said before, I do like it at this $100 price point. I'm a fan of it. I'm more erring on the side of it going sideways, but from a charting perspective, it's telling a little bit of a different story, unless the 9 miraculously, which if you look at the general trend of the 9, which has done nothing but go down, decides to change courses, which it could always do that, right? But for me, the trend is your friend until the end of the trend. So looking at this, I'm just going to keep going with the trend and say that the raw card is probably going to have to follow that at some point, as we are at this impasse. But in terms of looking at cards, that was our last card, which we looked at, and breaking it kind of all down. Obviously, we had the newest sets. We had a little bit of, quote unquote older sets, like, sets that are 4-6 months old. We had sets that we looked at that were more than a year old. And we looked at, examples of, I think it's going to go sideways and down. I think it's going to go sideways and up. It's looking like it's just going to go up, opportunity. and gonna just go down, right? We looked at all different types of cards when comparing, looking at these opportunities for certain cards, what's going to happen, what's not going to happen. And I think the most important thing, although you can sit here and just watch the video and be like, Eli, tell me which card to buy. Do I buy the Giratina? Do I buy the Lugia? Sure, if you want to take that approach, you can, because obviously, like we discussed throughout the video, it does seem like there is potential opportunity when investing in the singles. That's not what I want you to take away from this video. I want you to be able to dissect, look at what I'm bringing up on the charts, what I'm having a discussion about in terms of what I look for when knowing what's a good investment, what is a generally good pickup, a safe pickup, when determining which singles I do think are worth picking up raw and sending in for grading, because that's the general strategy I think you're going to make the most bang for your buck at, is buying raw and either holding raw or sending in 9 or 10 if the spread is there when kind of looking at the two as a whole, right? It's kind of like when looking at the Moonbreon. In theory, Moonbreon as a whole should continuously go up in value, so if you wanted to just pick it up raw, you could, right? And you could hold and you could probably make some value out of it. Potentially, obviously, grading fees are going to eat you up. So, personally speaking, that's where it's a really hard argument to try and hold raw, because you're saying to yourself, oh, whoopee, I picked it up at $530. It went to $600. Congratulations. You're losing money still because of the fee, right? So it's like you're really wanting to go and make value off that 10 if you can get it. So that's where the grading perspective is what you should really take into consideration the most, and kind of dissecting once again what I'm trying to explain to you guys when looking at general spreads between all 5 of these cards. But as far as it goes, that is all for today's video. Hopefully, once again, you guys found this an informative video. As always, you want to enter into our weekly giveaways. Make sure you leave a like, comment down below, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. We post pre-recorded content for you to do so each and every week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And lastly, if you want to be a part of the community or follow us on any of our socials, links are all down in the description below. We've got an awesome Discord community full of tons of fans of Pokemon, investing, collecting, like myself. So feel free to check that out. But that is all. Thank you all so much for watching. Until then, I will see you guys all on Wednesday. Peace.